Hey, here we are talking about coaching. My name is Yannick. I'm here with Nicki and Siwash. Hey.
Hello.
Hey, hey.
And this is our first recording session in 2025. So, not sure when this will come out, but Happy New Year to you too. I think it's probably a little too late to wish it to other people. But then I think you can always wish people a Happy New Year. And I saw this beautiful poem the other day about what I mean when I say Happy New Year. Because I recently had that experience as well. I wished somebody Happy New Year, and that the year did not start happy at all. Right. And it was an awkward moment because, and then I realized, oh, well, but we both were immediately aligned. Like, she didn't take it as an offense that I said Happy New Year, even though it created a bit of a mismatch, but like, it's a genuine wish for more good days than bad, and what happy means as a positive psychologist, it's not just positive emotions. There's a lot more as personal growth, there's relationships, purpose, meaning, competency, developing skills, living a flourishing life isn't about always feeling good. Right. So I think a Happy New Year for me is a year that is full of life, and life just means the ups and downs of what it offers and experience all the range of emotions. So that's what I wish people. But
I like that.
I digress. Today's question is around accountability, essentially, and I think the question came into a supervision session of mine where my supervisee asked themselves, "Well, am I becoming a crutch to my client? Right? Have I created some sort of dependency here?" I sometimes ask coaches, like, I used to ask, "What if you were to die tomorrow?" Right. And now sometimes, depending on the client, I say, well, what if tomorrow somebody kidnapped you on a beautiful island and you would never return and have no way of communicating to your clients? Right. The idea being that what if you're gone? Would your clients suffer without you being there? Would they collapse if the crutch is gone? Would they fall? Right. Would they be worse off if they don't have their coach in their life anymore? Not just being sad that the work doesn't continue, but actually be in a pretty bad spot because they created a sense of dependency on you. And if you're no longer around, it would be pretty bad. Right. And it's an interesting subject because it feeds the ego to create that kind of dependency, to be that crutch, to be that someone that somebody else can lean on. It feels good that somebody needs you. But as a coach, it's a risky thing. It's not a good thing. We don't want to create that, even though it kind of feels good to that part of the ego, but we want our clients to be able to walk on their own 2 feet. So the dependency thing is good for the wallet, right? But it's not good for the client. So, and yet so many coaching gurus tell you that this working with this accountability, even some coaching schools teach you that working with accountability is a very, very powerful coaching technique. And I think they're right. It is a very powerful coaching technique. Right? I had a client who had this breakthrough because we tried all the things, and then at some point it just wasn't working. And I thought, well, let's just try it. Like, how about you transfer an amount of money that's going to hurt you? And if you do what you say you will do by the end of the week, I'll transfer it back. And if not, I'll give it to some charity. And he's like, oh yeah, how about 50 quid? And I'm like, I thought more about 500 or 5,000, like something that you will actually really hurt, because what he was trying to do was not complex. There was no big, there was some blocker, but it was just a phone call or like hitting like publish on a post, something like that. It wasn't it was just, you just had to get over yourself and do it once. And the positive feedback of that action would have immediately reinforced future such behavior. It just needed to get this unlocked, I experienced it with a coach that I was working with at the time. I was really wanting to get into a magical morning routine, meditation and a cold shower and like some exercise and journaling. And I'm like, let's get it all done. And my coach wrote me a message every single morning. He said I would check in that I had done it, and if I hadn't done it, he would send me a question mark at 11 o'clock. So I would get a question mark if I didn't check in, and that would make me do it. The thing is, as soon as we stopped working together, I stopped doing it. I had like the tiniest injury in my leg, and I could have totally kept 80% of my morning going. Everything folded. Like, okay, the dark side of accountability, right? It really worked, and it felt amazing. But then, as soon as the crutch was gone, it collapsed. So there's a good example of how accountability can work, because if you use it to break through something, and then you gradually remove yourself because the natural reinforcement of the rewards of the action that you just started is going to be the reward. You don't no longer need the accountability from the coach. That's a really healthy accountability and a really good way to use it. But when it becomes a crutch and creates dependency, it's not actually helpful in the long run. It's only helpful in the short run, and then you get a great testimonial. But as soon as you're gone, it collapses. Right. So I think, in a nutshell, for me, that's the thing about accountability. We have to be careful with it, and we need to ask ourselves: am I becoming a crutch? Is there some dependency developing? And I think that question about, if I wasn't there again suddenly, if I wasn't there tomorrow, how would my client deal with that? I think it's a really helpful question to test whether your accountability is unhealthy or somewhat toxic even, or if it's really helpful. Let me pause there. I said too much.
Really interesting, everything you said. Wow. Siwash?
Well, the first thought that came up is that, well, if you die, I'll find another coach to replace you, right? But yeah, I think you made some really valid points, and I think it's you can look at it in different ways, right? I've looked at my own journey, where at one point, I think it was like 5-6 years ago, I worked 2 years with a coach, and when I stopped working with a coach, I clearly noticed a dip in my performance and in how I was showing up. And I thought, okay, but my baseline went from, let's say, like level 4 to level 8, and then when I stopped working with a coach, it dipped, but it didn't dip back to the old baseline. Right. And I've noticed this even with my income, and I've noticed this in my relationship. Right. So I don't think it's always a bad thing if the coach, and again, every coach is different, right? But like I look at this intentionally now, and like, can I help the client almost develop their inner coach? Like, can I help them develop certain skills? Can I help them develop certain level of thinking? Again, not everyone wants that, but if they're open for that, then we increase that baseline, so they don't necessarily rely on me to keep that level, right? And I think it's, and this is probably where there's a longer discussion, right? But I think it's normal. If you look at elite athletes, they perform at a very high level, their coach leaves, or for whatever reason they stop working with that coach, and you can see the performance dip, right? I think it happened to Tiger Woods, and I don't know if he intentionally stopped working with his coach, right? But it happens to a lot of athletes where they perform at a really high level, they stop working with the coach, and then it dips. But the question here is again around, I think if you look at it, am I becoming a crutch? Well, it's a good question, right? Am I creating that codependency? What am I doing to raise awareness around? Well, what are we? How will you continue if we stop after 6 months? And I think also for a lot of coaches, and this used to be me, is we don't have this conversation because of the money. Because we always feel like, well, if I have this conversation, they feel like I'm trying to convince them to keep paying me, right? But what if we remove that money part and then just have an actual conversation around, like, hey, Yannick, would it serve you to continue? And if I couldn't continue with you, what would you do next?
Really interesting. Yeah, I'm liking the different ways, or like the different angles you're both taking on it as well. I mean, what comes to my mind with dependency is like dependency to the extent that, I feel like the client should feel a slight loss of a crutch to some extent, because ultimately we are offering a service. And I think that's where we are the added value. So I think, it's to some degree, perhaps we are inevitably a crutch, adding hopefully value to our clients' lives. On the other hand, I think when it comes to, a question of dependency, it's interesting. I think what came to me, because I think it's a subject for me in therapy right now, and I'm maybe looking at it through the lens of attachment theory, which is actually just coming up quite strongly because it's a question I had with my therapist before we broke over the holidays for several weeks. And she's like, well, how do you feel about it? And I was like, well, I think it's really important for me not to depend on you and for me to be able to cope without you and for me to find out if I can do that, So I don't know, ultimately, yeah, we don't want our clients to become dependent on us. And I think it's also part of our role as well as adding value. And maybe initially there is more vulnerability to empower our clients and equip them maybe with the toolkit, as you were saying, make clients their own coaches so that eventually, they should be becoming stronger and stronger. I think maybe people come to coaching when they're feeling more vulnerable. And then the beauty is that we have the potential to make them stronger and equip them and empower them by sharing, some tools with them. But yeah, certainly I don't think you want clients to end up in dependency. And I think the other thing that came up for me with one of you guys sharing the stories, I think, having another person, at least for me, I can say that definitely has that effect, makes me more accountable because I think, this is also a thing, people tend to sometimes care more, respond better to others than they can to their own motivation. So I think in that sense, we are a motivating factor, but also it's a question of intrinsic motivation, right? Trying to get your clients to have intrinsic motivation where they're doing the things and it's not because you're there to supervise them or text them or motivate them or hold them accountable, but because they understand why it's important to you. And I think, again, as a coach, that's maybe something we can help to empower them, to reinforce them. So yeah, that's what kind of came to me.
Yeah, I think the main thing here is that if someone's a crutch for you, you're not really meeting them at eye level, right? It's not a partnership. I mean, I was questioning that, right? Could that be a partnership with your crutch? I talked to a pro ice hockey player a little while ago, just before Christmas, and long story short, he said that the feeling of oneness with a team he described, right? I talked about snowboarding, he talked about ice hockey, and he said, the way that you relate to your board or your binding, that's how I relate to my team players. Because he said during COVID, it was really difficult because there was no audience. And I'm like, but there's other people on the ice. He's like, yeah, but they're not people. They're part of me. Is that a partnership that you have with a crutch? And I don't think so, right? I think when that kind of dependency is created by maybe too much accountability, it changes something in the relationship. And I think that's risky, right? Because I'm sure many coaches out there will have noticed that when they're using too much accountability and the client is not doing what they said they will do, it does something to the relationship. And clients have dropped out because they felt embarrassed to come back to the coaching because they were leaning too much on accountability. And that's not helpful. I want my clients always to come back and talk about what's happening here. And if I'm becoming the crutch too much, then maybe they don't want to do that anymore. And that's really in disservice of the client, right? So finding the right balance of using the accountability where it's helpful, but not letting it become something that gets between you. I think it's super important. And I forgot who it was. A colleague of mine, coach from the US, he tended to say, nobody needs a coach. Everybody should want one.
Nice.
And I love that, right? Because if you need a coach, it points to some imbalance in this relationship, potentially, right? Not necessarily, but potentially. And that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah. I heard that phrase from Rich Litvin. I don't know if this is the same person you heard it from, but I think that often applies more to high performers, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing to say hey, I need a coach. I'm really struggling in my marriage right now. I need a relationship coach to get things, there's things I'm not seeing, there's things I'm doing, and I don't understand why I'm doing, why am I reacting why am I reacting in such a way when this happens? I think sometimes that's a nice marketing phrase. Yeah. As you guys are speaking, actually, something else came up for me, and I think this is again when the coach can, when I put my ego away, I can really look at okay, accountability is important. There are studies that show how important it is. I can help my client create a system for accountability, and I can be part of kind of like helping them design the system. We co-create a system. We almost like install the system, and then they work the system. And I can initially be part of that system, but slowly I want to kind of almost remove myself from that system, right? So, and I think personally, I really like that, because for me, I've had this with clients, and it's really draining when people are like, can you message me on Monday and Friday? I'm like, and initially there's times where I've said yes because I want to please my client. And I'm like, and then there's like the work, for example, doesn't get done. And they're like, oh, but you didn't message me. And I'm like, okay, so what just happened? This responsibility shifted to me, right? So now I'm like, hey, as an example, I'm like, can you put a reminder in your calendar on a Monday and a Friday? And what I will do from my side, and I've now, my assistant does this, for example, we have a group where we put on a Monday, we ask clients, what is your focus for the week? Right? So now because a lot of, for example, the coaches that we work with, and we help them grow their business, they want accountability. And they love this. They're like, oh, now I'm really focused on Monday. On a Friday, I have a check-in. So on Friday, we ask them, tell us about your week. What are your wins? What were your challenges? But you see, we build a system. Now on my side, there's a person there, right? In this case, it's assistant. If I don't have that person, I can do that. But
AI is going to do that soon.
Yeah, and AI can do that.
No, seriously.
But I think it's moving away potentially from like looking at, just the person, to looking at, can I build a system around this? And I think even for ourselves, like if I'm looking at going to the gym every Monday morning, well, what is my system for that? My system is, well, on Sunday, I want to get my clothes ready. I want to maybe set my alarm, right? I want to have my water bottle ready. And I think when we start doing these little things, we create intrinsic motivation, right? Or we have to connect also to like the reason why. And I think that's probably another conversation, but people that are extrinsically motivated, they usually want more from the coach. And people that are intrinsically motivated, they're easier to work with, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, most programs, right, unfortunately, right, and I think a lot of coaches also at some point fall into this, is we see that extrinsically motivated people, they're usually quicker to part with money, right? And but they're usually harder to work with, because they almost push the responsibility to the coach. It's like, you hold me accountable, you help me make this much money, you help me create this amazing relationship, I'm hiring you. It's almost like you do the push-ups for me.
But that's extrinsically motivated, right? And we use extrinsic motivation all the time, creating an external reward, right? I mean, I come from a positive psychology background, so Decky and Ryan's self-determination theory is a theory of well-being, but essentially a theory of motivation. And intrinsic motivation is really what we're trying to get to in every coaching. And it might start with being extrinsically motivated. And most people are intrinsically motivated. I think everybody to some extent is extrinsically motivated, meaning that the motivation comes from the outside because we want to please our parents or get good grades or get the salary at the end or not lose the job, right? But I always love asking people, what do you do when nobody's watching? What do you love doing? What are your hobbies, right? What are the things that you get involved in without extrinsic motivation? Because then we're really getting a window to the person and to what drives that person and what do they really connect with. What do you keep going, even though there's no reason to keep it going other than you like it? And intrinsic motivation that's from within, that's so strong. We want to get there. So we can use some extrinsic motivation to get stuff done. And I noticed that in myself. I need some external deadlines. Otherwise, certain things are not going to get done, even though they're really meaningful to me, even though I really want to get them done. I still need that external force sometimes. So it's not an either or. I don't want to preach that, everything must be intrinsically motivated. Nobody should use accountability. I mean, it's in the ACC level ICF way of working. Like you wouldn't pass the ICF assessment if you don't have some form of conversation at the end of a session about who you're going to be accountable to. But it doesn't mean, like Siwash said, right? It doesn't mean that the coach needs to be the accountability buddy. You can ask or strategically remove yourself as the accountability buddy. So if they say, can you text me Monday and Friday, you can explore or maybe be quite open about it. It's like, I don't really want this to come between us. Is there somebody that can text you Monday and Friday? Is there some system you can put in place so that you can be accountable without this getting between what we're doing here? So we can work with accountability without being the accountability person or the focus of the accountability, and without risking the relationship in that way.
I like that solution. And I think also just like even bringing it into the room, into conversation, like their relationship with accountability. I think what it made me think of there as well is I had one client with whom I also initially tried to do it like with setting deadlines. And I said like, okay, like how can we ensure you do this? And he's like, oh yeah, if you message me on a blah, blah, blah. And I tried that, but like time and time again, also he didn't really do his homework, or he said he'd do it tomorrow or by the time, we'd meet or whatever. And it didn't happen. And it felt quite uncomfortable and awkward, feeling like, oh, am I now like reminding him of this parental role or a teacher role? Like, it would have, what I didn't do at the time, but, I then started doing going forward is thinking more about bringing that maybe into the conversation. If someone requests that and be like, yeah, like where is accountability for you? I think it's worth exploring.
I think I've said all the things, but Siwash usually has some more.
there's always
Bring
more.
it on.
Yeah. No, I think the last part is for me, like I'm always looking at how it shows up in other areas of life. And if I think about, I've been married now 8 years, and it's the way I look at it in that area is, while I don't want to, I think, you can be in love with someone, and at the same time, I don't want to completely depend on this person. So I'm looking at like, how do I fill my own bucket, right? So what can I do to take care of myself? So like, in terms of self-love, in terms of taking time out for me. And Tony Robbins talks about the 6 human needs, that if we take care of our own human needs, we don't rely on other people to take care of them. And I think sometimes that happens also in a coaching relationship, where you get connection from the coach. You get quality time from the coach, right? You get maybe words of affirmation. So there's lots of different ways that actually there's a lot of love and there's a lot of good stuff coming from that relationship. But again, we want to make sure that we actually look at like, am I doing those things myself? Am I, I think the 6 human needs, or looking at it from perspective of self-love, 6 human needs can be really useful, because that's sometimes where the dependency is created. And that's just very similar to a love relationship. The person can pass away. The person can, is how do we deal with a breakup? How do we deal with any breakup?
Yeah, and there's the attachment theory coming in again, Nicki, right? As a coach, you want to be securely attached, right? In a romantic relationship, if you have two anxiously avoidant attached people together, they can really lean on each other, right? And that can be a very healthy relationship when you lean on each other in that way. In coaching, that's not the case, right? Or can it? I don't know. I hadn't really thought about whether this could also work with an anxiously avoidant attached coach. I'm not so sure that's the kind of relationship you want to create, But if you look into secure attachment styles, that's really what you want to create in coaching, as far as I stand now. Because when you're both reasonably well, you could both go separate ways at any point in time. You choose to be in that relationship. And that's really powerful partnership, because the commitment then is about staying there because you want to be in that, and not because you feel you need it.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about that. That should be probably a separate episode. Because I think I read an article about this, how this is probably one of the most important things for successful entrepreneurs. And again, a coach is an entrepreneur to a certain extent, right? So I don't know if you want to briefly touch on that, or in terms of how a coach can create a secure attachment, or shall we save that?
I think let's save that for another episode.
Okay.
Cool. Let's make a note. Let's close here. Guys, thank you. This has been quite inspiring. And I hope it's been inspiring to other people too. If you're listening to this, you got particular ways to work with accountability, or maybe some other insights that we haven't named yet that could continue the conversation, we'd love to hear them. So leave a comment, reach out, write an email, or start a conversation with one of your colleagues. As you know, we want to spark things here. So take the flame, run with it. See you next time. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you, so if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review, or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch or you like to listen or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.